Welcome to Heartbreak Revealed. Discover real stories of wives, betrayals, and shocking twists. Hit subscribe button and let's get to our story. We were informed that the jury had reached a verdict and we waited for them to come back into the courtroom. There was an undercurrent of noise running through the court. It was subtle and muted, but you could hear people talking. They were all wondering if I would be sent to prison. I was wondering the same thing. Would I be acquitted or sent to jail? I hoped to be released, but it really didn't make a lot of difference. Freedom would be much better than incarceration. But either way it goes, I did what I thought had to be done, not for me but for my family and most other families in this city. I could live with that. The reason I'm here is because of my actions and reactions, and I will accept the consequences. I didn't start or cause the problem, but I was the final solution. My name is Alex Johnson. My family has always believed in personal freedom, and I was named after two patriots of the American Revolution. It's not really important, but it does help explain my beliefs and actions. I was arrested on my 45th birthday. Yeah, I know. A bit old to start a life of crime. I was drafted into the Army after I graduated from high school in 1980. I spent 20 years in the service of my country. I wasn't a Ranger, Green Beret, or Special Forces. I was just a man doing a job and retired as a Master Sergeant. I could have retired as a First Sergeant or even a Sergeant Major, but I refused the promotions because I wanted to stay close to the men in the squad and the company. I did serve 2 tours in the Middle East, and on my first tour expanded my knowledge of hand-to-hand combat. My counterpart with the Saudi Army was a master in several forms of martial arts. He spent a lot of time sharing what he knew, and I was a good student. I was pretty big at 6'2" and 190 pounds. And coupled with my training, it made me a very dangerous man. A few months prior to my trial, I got a call from my brother, Sam. It was not a social call about his family or how I was doing or why I hadn't come for a visit. He wanted and needed my help because his daughter Emma had been carjacked and his son Luke had been beaten. Sam's son Mike and his wife Lisa had been killed in a car crash when the children were very young. Their only living relatives were Sam, his wife Julie, and me, so the kids came to live with Sam. The 3 guys took Emma and her car behind some shops in a strip mall where these sorry excuses for men beat her up badly. One of the store owners was working late, saw what they were doing, and called the police. The animals were in the process of ripping off her clothes when they heard the sirens and took off in her car. Emma, who was 16, would grab any man's attention. She was tall like her father and grandfather, with a slender, athletic body, strawberry blonde hair, and green eyes from her mother. I understood the attraction to her by the 3 men, but I couldn't and wouldn't forgive their actions. Emma gave the police descriptions of all 3 a-holes while she was in the ER being treated for her injuries. She was bruised, sore, and had a few minor cuts, but basically, she was okay. The quick action by the store owner saved her from being assaulted. 2 days later, the police arrested the 3 men while they were driving Emma's car. She went down to the police station with her father and picked them out of a lineup. The men were charged and held over for trial. Apparently, they made bail. 3 days after being released, they started getting threatening phone calls about what would happen if Emma testified. A couple of days later, Luke was grabbed on his way home from school and roughed up a bit. It wasn't really serious, but he would have a black eye and his top lip was cut. Luke said that a van pulled up, 2 men jumped out and smacked him around. After the first punch, Luke kicked one of the guys in the family jewels and then just tried to cover up and didn't get a good look at the guy beating on him. Luke said it was a white van, but he didn't get the license number. Emma was at home when Luke came in and called her father. Sam rushed home from work and called the cops, but the police said that if Luke couldn't identify who beat him up, they couldn't do anything. The police said they didn't have the manpower to guard his family and told Sam to keep the family close and to be careful. That's when he called me, asking for my help in guarding his family. Sam is a couple of years older than me, with the same features inherited from our father. At 6'3" and 210 pounds, we share the same body type, our black hair and blue eyes, and our family resemblance have sometimes led people to think we're twins. He was my best friend growing up and always had my back. The difference in our temperament and philosophy usually complemented each other. Normally, Sam would try to talk rather than fight when there was a problem. He wasn't a coward, he just felt talking it out was better than fighting if at all possible. Not me. I was always ready to take names, kick butt, and talk later. We have the same beliefs, just a different way of getting our way. He was like Teddy Roosevelt, talk softly but carry a big stick. I was more like General Patton, may God have mercy on my enemies because I won't. You need to understand my philosophy to understand me and how I react to things. I will put up with a certain amount of crap. Once that quota has been reached, I will do what is necessary to put an end to it. It takes a lot to push me over the edge, but once I go over that edge, I will go all the way. I have no compassion or sympathy for anyone but my family and my friends. I have learned to disengage my mind, and I don't lose any sleep over the things I have done or have to do. I listened to Sam for about 10 minutes. When he wound down, I told him I would be at his house by daylight. Just hang in there. The cavalry is on the way. I tried to reassure him. Packing took less than an hour because I always keep a kit ready to go. I live off my pension and some investments I made while in the Army. Therefore, I didn't have to check with a job or boss to see if I could have time off. It wouldn't have mattered. I would have gone to help my family no matter what a boss or supervisor said. I didn't have a wife to check with either. I had married a pretty young nurse after my second tour in the Middle East. She was a nurse in the hospital where I was recovering. I was in the hospital because my body did not react well to bullets, and Sarah took a liking to the crusty old dog face. I wasn't a very good patient and yelled at the other nurses, but she wouldn't put up with it. She would tell me to pipe down and do what I was supposed to. I was impressed with this young nurse that put me in my place. We began to kid each other about who was a better sergeant. As I was leaving the hospital, I asked her to go to dinner with me, and our romance developed quickly. Apparently, Sarah saw something worthwhile in the battle-hardened soldier. We had some wonderful years together, in spite of some of the duty stations we lived at. After being married for a couple of years, I was going to be stationed at Fort Benning in Georgia for at least 3 years as an instructor, so we decided to start a family. I came home one day from teaching some of the second lieutenants how to find their butts without using a road map and was a little stressed out. I remember thinking that the Army was in bad shape if these guys were our future military leaders. Sarah met me just inside the door of our apartment in a pair of high heels and a velvet choker around her neck. She handed me a cold beer and began to unbutton my shirt. So much for the stress from work. I picked her up before she could get my shirt off and carried her into our bedroom. About an hour later, as I was holding her and drinking the now warm beer, she told me I was going to be a father. Sergeant Daddy, she called me. 2 months later, Sarah's car was hit broadside by a drunk driver. Both Sarah and the baby were killed. I was alone again. We had been married a little over 5 years. The only person I wanted to call before I left was Claire. Her husband John and I served together in the Middle East. He and I were on the same flight to the paradise of the Middle East on our all-expenses-paid tour provided by the U.S. Army. We became friends and spent all of my first tour in the same company. John lost his battle with cancer shortly before I got out of the Army. I met Claire at one of the reunions of the company after I retired. We began to spend time together since we both lived in Houston, and now we are more of a friends with benefits relationship than a couple. Still, she would worry if she didn't hear from me. I told her where I was going and why, then I asked her to pick up my mail. Will you? Sure, no problem, Alex. How long will you be gone? Don't know for sure. I'll call you when I get an idea. Open the mail, and if anything needs my attention, call me, please, I requested. Just remember, hotshot, you're not 25 anymore. Keep a firm grasp on reality, don't. These aren't windmills. These are serious a-holes. Claire always worries about me. I'll call you when I get there. Thanks, Claire. I hung up and grabbed 3 hours of sleep, waking up at 8:00 p.m. I got my kit, jumped in my truck, and began my journey. Travel time from my home in Houston to Sam's place in Austin was going to be 4 to 5 hours, depending on traffic. I planned to take as long as 6 hours with stops for food and gas. Better to be fresh upon arrival because I didn't know how long it would be before things got busy. And things were going to get busy. I was going to see that they did. My brother could depend on the police and talk about the legal system all he wanted to, but I was going to give the system a little help. I was going to put an end to these threats, or maybe to the guys making the threats. It was all the same to me. Either way, These three cabrons had made a very bad career move. They had attacked my family, and by doing so had given up any chance at mercy. I'm not a diplomat, I'm not a peacemaker. But I am the solution to this problem. I would begin to plot my moves once I got to Austin. I got to my brother's house around 5:00 a.m. after a 6-hour drive and walked through the kitchen door. It was unlocked. I made some coffee and sat at the table waiting for someone to get up. Sam was the first one into the kitchen, and he stopped in surprise when he saw me. "Want some coffee, Sam?" "I just made a fresh pot," I said with a bit of sarcasm. "Anyone can come into your house through an unlocked door." "Not real smart, considering what's going on," I scolded him. Recovering from the shock of seeing me sitting in his kitchen, he nodded his head as I got on his case about the door. He came over and hugged me. We said all the things that brothers usually do, and Sam began to fill in the details about the three men. Their names were Carl, Doug, and Frank. They aren't members of any gang, so we wouldn't have that problem. It looked like they were just a trio of a-holes trying to get some cash and have some fun with a young girl. I began to tell Sam some of my ideas, telling him I hoped to persuade the terrible trio to back off, which would take the pressure off. In the meantime, I was going to be an outrider, not staying at the house but staying close. This outrider idea wasn't something I learned in the Army, but something I picked up watching a John Wayne Western. If it worked for the Duke, it could work for us. As I finished explaining my plan, my sister-in-law Julie walked into the kitchen. She smiled at seeing me and came to me with a big hug and kiss. I was amazed again at how pretty she was. Julie is in her early 40s, but you would never guess it. She has the body of a woman 20 years younger, and if her brown short-cut hair didn't have some gray in it, you would never guess her age. Her big brown eyes almost always had a twinkle in them. That morning, her eyes were a little more guarded with concern for her family. That evening, as my brother stepped outside to get his newspaper, someone shot him, and I'll give one guess as to who was responsible. Sam was hit in the leg and went down. Luckily, it was a small caliber .22 round, and not too much damage was done. He would have to stay in the hospital for a couple of days and then be off his feet for a few more. I talked to the police and got the usual runaround. They would investigate the shooting. We all knew who shot my brother, but the police had their hands tied by legalities. One of the police captains was a fellow veteran, so I had a word with him. I guess the outrider plan was over before it had really begun, and it was time for me to get proactive. You know, take some action to alleviate the problem instead of reacting when something happened. There is a huge network of veterans all over the country. I contacted a couple of guys in the Austin area, and they put the word out. My hope was to get a lead on the hangout of the Unholy Three. In the meantime, I would do some scouting on my own. Austin doesn't have a lot of low-life bars for a city that size. Other than the lounges at the hotels, there just aren't many neighborhood-type taverns. I couldn't picture those three at a hotel lounge, so I concentrated on the taverns. The next morning I went to the hospital to see Sam, and there was a cop outside of his room. I identified myself, and he told me it was just a precaution. He smiled at me and said that someone had lit a fire under the brass. Guilty as charged, I told him and smiled back at him. Julie and Emma were talking to Sam, asking him if he knew what I was going to do. Julie knows how I am, and she was worried that I would get in trouble. Julie said to Sam he should forget about getting revenge, it could backfire on him. Sam looked down for a moment and then at Julie and said, "Make no mistake, it's not revenge he's after, it's a reckoning." "What do you mean, honey?" Julie asked. "Alex doesn't care about revenge. He's going to put an end to the situation, or to them. There will be a reckoning brought by Alex to those three for attacking his family. You know how he is about family. The only thing left to do for those boys is to pray for their souls, unless they are very careful. Those guys are walking around dead. They just don't know it yet." I decided to quit listening and stepped into the room. "Hello, boys and girls." I grabbed Julie and Emma and hugged them to me. "How are you guys holding up?" They both assured me they were fine. Then Julie motioned me out into the hall. "I don't want you to get yourself in trouble," Julie warned me. "Sam got shot just getting the paper. I know you, and I know that you are going after these guys. I won't tell you not to go after them. I know you won't listen to me, so just be careful, please. Call the police if you find out anything. Promise me, Alex. Honey, Sam's the one that calls the police. I love and admire him more than anyone I know, but he trusts people too much. I trust my ability to protect my family more than I trust the police to do anything. Julie, I love all of you guys, Sam, Emma, Luke, and you. I won't let anyone or anything hurt you while I can do something about it. I looked her in the eye and said, I will promise you this, I won't get hurt. That's as far as I can go. Someone has to stop these guys, and I may be just the right one to do it. But I'll make you another promise. Those three will have every chance to back off. If anything else happens, it will be their choice. I left Julie standing there with a sad look on her face. It was time for those three to pay the consequences of their actions. The network of vets had come up with 2 possible bars that the boys might be hanging around. I waited until 7:00 that evening and went to one of the taverns. It's a Cleach GC, but the name was The Last Drop Inn. I had gotten mugshots of Carl, Doug, and Frank off the newspaper's internet site. It's amazing what can be found with a computer. I told the bartender that one of these guys was giving my daughter a hard time, and I wanted to discuss the situation with him. The bartender took the 50 bill I gave as an incentive to look at the pictures. It was a waste of a good 50. The bartender hadn't seen them and was honest enough to turn down more money. He said he had a daughter too. I gave him my cell number, and he promised to call me if the 3 showed up at his bar. I gave him another 50 anyway. Tavern number 2 was called The Other Place. I had better luck there. The bartender said the trio was in the back room playing pool. That cost me another 50 bill. I gave him a 100 bill and asked him not to call the cops if something went down. After I promised to pay for any damages, he agreed. As I walked into the back room, I got my first look at the guys. There was nothing special about them, just 3 punks in their 20s. Carl was about 5 feet 10 inches with a slim build. Doug was just a normal guy except for his buck teeth. He was just a punk and would follow the lead of the other 2. However, Frank was pretty big and looked mean. He must have been 63 and weighed around 230 pounds. He was not a man to let get hold of you. Even if he wasn't a good technical fighter, he was big enough to cause me a problem. I sort of shuffled into the room the way an older man might and leaned against the table. It only took a couple of minutes before Carl noticed me. He said over his shoulder, "You want something, old man? Is this a private game?" "I would like to play with 3 tough guys," I answered. All 3 of them looked puzzled. "You are tough guys, aren't you?" Carl turned to face me then. The way he moved told me that the move was just bravado. "What the hell are you talking about?" He was sizing me up and trying to figure out what I wanted. He knew it had nothing to do with a pool game. "I heard you guys were real tough. I mean, you beat the hell out of a girl that couldn't weigh more than 100 pounds, and then, to show how tough you really are, you slapped around a 10-year-old boy. Man, you guys are the real deal." "All right, old man, you're going to get hurt. You better leave while you can," Carl ordered. He must be the brains, because the other 2 just stood there and grinned like monkeys. I looked at each one as I called their names. "Carl, Doug, Frank, you guys are due for a butt-kicking, and I'm wearing the boots to do it. That was my niece you carjacked, beat up, and tried to assault. That was my nephew you slapped around to make your point, and that was my brother you shot. No one harms my family," I shouted at them. Carl started laughing, and the other 2 followed suit. "Too late to leave now, old man. I gave you a chance, and now you're going to get the hell beat out of you. Go get him, Doug." He pushed Doug toward me and stood back to watch. If you have a 3-to-1 superiority over an opponent, it is a tactical mistake to attack one at a time. No matter how good the one man is, if 3 guys rush him together, it will be very difficult for him to defend himself. Obviously, the trio were not students of war, or they didn't think one man was much of a threat. They were about to make a very bad mistake. I was still leaning on a pool table, and Doug tried to grab my shirt. First, I hit him in the throat, going between his reaching hands. When he grabbed his throat, I swept his legs out from under him. Grabbing his pool stick, I turned and attacked Frank. The idea was to put him out of the game as fast as possible. I was pretty sure I could handle Carl and Doug, but Frank was another matter. I hit Frank across the bridge of his nose with the pool cue. If you hit someone's nose, the first thing they do is grab it with both hands. Their eyes start to water, and they can't see for a second or 2. Carl had started forward. I took a second to kick him in the groin, and he went down. Turning back to Frank, I kicked the side of his leg at the knee with the toe of my boot. I was wearing steel-toed boots, and he went to the floor. I had done what I had to keep Frank out of the way. His nose was probably broken, and that knee may never be the same. Doug was up and moving by this time. Doug was put back on the floor with a punch to his nose, another to his tender throat, and a kick to his midsection. The confrontation with Doug and Frank took less than 15 seconds. Now for the last one. Carl had moved behind the pool table after getting up. He was on the opposite side of the table with his pool cue held like a club. Now he began to wonder, and he wasn't sure he wanted to mess with this old man. A word here about using a pool cue as a club: most people grab a cue by the smaller end so they can use the big end as a club. The problem with that is that when the stick breaks, you are left with a thin piece of wood to protect yourself. The best way is to grab the thick end. If it breaks, you still have the larger end as your weapon. I went around the table toward him, and he tried to stay away from me by circling the table. I picked up a ball from the table, threw it at him, and as he ducked, I jumped onto the table. When he looked up again, I kicked him on the chin. Carl went down, and I jumped on him. I put his arm across my knee and used it as a lever to dislocate his shoulder. Now I had all three of them in a situation I could control. I pulled all of them close together. I had a message for them. Two were barely conscious, and I had to revive them a little. When I had their attention, I started my little speech. "You guys are pitiful. You let an old man kick your butt." I laughed at them. "The only reason you are still alive is because of the promise I made my sister-in-law. If it was up to me, you would never get up from the floor. This is what you are going to do. You will leave my family alone after our little discussion here. Do you understand?" All three of them said yes or nodded their heads. "Let's not have this conversation again, guys. You really won't like the outcome next time." I left the back room and walked through the bar. I gave the bartender a 100 and told him I'd broken a couple of cues. I felt no guilt about the confrontation with the unholy trio. It was 3-1, but I was better than them, and they got their lumps. Payback, pure and simple. If I hadn't made that promise to Julie, the three of them would be just a pile of dead meat. I went back to my brother's house and sat down in a chair on the back porch. No one was home. The family was still at the hospital visiting Sam. That was okay. I needed the time to wind down. After every military operation, there is a debriefing session. This is used to gather information for the future, and just as important, it gives men time to unwind. You have to have a little quiet time to allow the adrenaline to get out of your system. If you don't wind down, you'll get the shakes. The next morning found me sleeping on the back porch. When the family got home last night, they didn't check out back, and I was already asleep. Having breakfast with Julie, Emma, and Luke was a pleasant experience. I hadn't had breakfast with a family since my wife Sarah was killed. After breakfast, I treated my hands for some cuts and abrasions from the night before. No matter how hard you try, your hands will always take a beating from a fight. I finished cleaning up, and we all went back to the hospital. Sam was doing very well and was going to be able to go home the next day. The bullet had missed everything important, and he was healing nicely. I almost expected the police to come see me about the fight at the bar, but they never showed up. I guess the three tough guys didn't want to admit that an old man kicked their butts. Julie and I brought Sam home the next morning. His leg was healing, but it was very weak and sore. We fixed up the hide-a-bed in the family room for him and Julie so they could sleep there for a few days. He wanted to sleep upstairs in their room for now. Everything had just about got back to normal. What happened next was my fault. I was sure that I had read the three men correctly and that my little conversation with them would solve the problem. I was a little cocky when I explained to Sam and Julie about my meeting with the trio. My overconfidence cost us big time. 2 weeks had passed since my meeting in the pool room, and everything had been quiet. The trial was going to start in about a month. It was mid-Saturday morning. I didn't feel that I was needed anymore and was packing to leave. Grabbing my kit and starting down the stairs, I heard a sound I had heard too many times in the Middle East, an AK-47 in full auto mode. The front of the house seemed to explode as the round struck. I jumped to the landing and used the door jamb as cover. It doesn't pay to rush into a stream of bullets from a fully automatic weapon. That will get you dead. I pulled my Kimber .45 out of my kit and waited for the shooter to reload. He had been using a spray and pray technique, And usually, that isn't a very accurate way to shoot because the barrel rises and you lose your target. When the firing stopped, I went to one of the front windows to locate the shooter. A car was stopped in front of the house, and I could see the rifle barrel sticking out of the window. I shot twice at a spot just behind the weapon. The car raced away, and I fired twice more. Then it was time to check the family. Sam's face was cut in a few places from flying glass, but the cuts weren't bad. Julie hadn't been as lucky. She had been hit at least twice. Both kids had been in the backyard and weren't hurt. We called 911, and Sam rode in the ambulance with Julie. I gathered up the kids and took them to Julie's sister for the night. After I got them settled, I went to the hospital and found Sam in the surgery waiting room. Julie was in surgery, and it would be at least an hour before we knew anything. The police arrived and started to question Sam and me. I almost went ballistic and started yelling at them. Jesus Christ, my brother's wife is in surgery, and you idiots are wasting time asking stupid questions. You know who did this, so go get them, you idiots. Sam calmed me down and gave the police all the information he had. Then the police asked if one of us had shot back at the car. The cops said the neighbors heard the machine gun fire and then 4 very loud gunshots. I took a couple of deep breaths to keep from overreacting and told him that I didn't know what he was talking about. He didn't really seem to believe me, but he had no proof that anyone had shot back. The cops left and we went back to worrying about Julie. Remember the debriefing? I hadn't had any quiet time and the snakes were crawling. I started to shake and then I started to cry. I wasn't sobbing or anything, just tears rolling down my face. I had caused this by being overconfident. I thought Sam and I had talked about moving the family away until the trial, but I was so sure that I had handled the problem that we didn't. Julie was in surgery fighting for her life because of me. 2 hours after I got to the hospital, a doctor came to the waiting room and asked for Mr. Johnson. Funny thing, both Sam and I answered to Mr. Johnson. The doctor said that Julie would be okay and that she had been hit twice. A ricochet had sliced into her left arm, and that wound was more like a deep gouge that would heal easily. The other wound had been to her left shoulder. The round had gone through and through just below her collarbone. She had some muscle damage, but again, should heal with no problem, and regain full use of her arm with therapy. I said a prayer for Julie and then one for me. Even though I was thinking about Julie, my mind was planning my next move. I realized that I couldn't do anything to help Julie right now, but I could see to it that no one else in the family would be hurt. I didn't say anything to Sam. He had enough on his mind right now and didn't need to worry about me too. We wouldn't be able to see Julie for at least another hour, so I left to go talk to the kids. They needed to see my face when I told them their mother would be okay. Afterwards, I went back to the house to get ready for my mission. As I said before, I always have a kit ready to go in case I have to go somewhere in a hurry. The kit contained the usual extra clothes, toiletries, and an extensive first aid box. There were a couple of additional items in my weapons. In the kit was the Kimber .45, and there was also a selection of knives. Ammo for the guns completed my kit. Behind the seat in my truck was a steel box holding my deer hunting rifle, a .308 Remington 700 ADL. I have several accessories that turn this sporting rifle into a sniper's dream. These are the tools I will use to solve the problem of that unholy trio. My mission was a simple one. I was going to make sure those thugs didn't have a chance to make another attack on the family. The action I was planning had 3 possible results, and only one was good. I planned on taking Carl and company out. First result, I could be killed and not get the job done. Second result, I erase Carl and his posse, but get caught and jailed. Third result, and my choice the mission is completed and no one goes to jail. See, only one good conclusion out of the 3 possibilities. Yeah, I know, vengeance is mine, I will repay, says the Lord. But the last time my family was attacked, the Lord must have been busy. He will just have to judge me after the fact because I will not allow my family to be attacked and hurt again. It wasn't going to happen again, not on my watch. Now, before you totally get the wrong idea, let me explain some facts of life as I see them. I don't believe in going around shooting people at random. I do believe in protecting what and who I care for. In the Army, I protected and supported the guys in my squad and my company. It was part of my job. I will protect my loved ones with even more vigor. Before you get all emotional about those poor innocent boys, remember what they had already done. They stole my niece's car, beat the hell out of her, and tried to assault her. They might have killed her after they were done with her. Then they slapped around a 10-year-old boy to show my niece what would happen if she testified against them. Next, Carl and company tried to kill my family with a drive-by shooting. These are not innocent young boys doing a little mischief. These are stone-cold killers and rabid dogs, and I am the dog catcher. A close-in firefight is a lot different than hand-to-hand combat. Even if only one of them gets lucky while exchanging gunfire, it could ruin my day. That is why I was going to use the sniper rifle. If I could, I intended to do my mission from 400 yards away if at all possible. Their AKs and handguns don't have that kind of range, and they probably wouldn't even know where the shots were coming from. I was watching the TV news that night to get a weather forecast and got a bit of good news. The news reported that the body of a young man by the name of Frank Thompson had been found down by the river. He had been shot twice with a .45, but the police had no leads to the shooter. The police had pulled in Carl and Doug, but they had alibis from their girlfriends. On the plus side, I guess the shots I fired at that car had done some good after all. There was no need to look for Carl and Doug during the day, they would only come out at night. So I went to see how Julie was doing and to talk some business with Sam. I found Julie sitting up in bed, looking pretty good. She and Sam were laughing about something when I walked in. Julie saw me and smiled. I almost lost it. I got tears in my eyes and apologized to her. Then Julie held out her arms to me and I went to her. "Nate, what's wrong? Why are you apologizing? You have been a rock for my family and have nothing to be sorry about," Julie said. "It was my cockiness that almost got you killed. I thought I had those punks scared enough to leave you guys alone." "I should have made sure," I told her. Between Julie and Sam, they got me calmed down a little and we had a nice visit. After about 30 minutes, I motioned Sam out of the room. I asked him to take a walk with me, and we ended up in a courtyard. I handed him a large, thick envelope. "Sam, you guys are the only family I have left. If something happens to me, my will is in this envelope. I have left almost everything to you, Julie, and the kids. I want Claire to have my boat. She always enjoyed going out on it. The condo is paid for and can be sold for enough to put Emma and Luke through college or whatever you want to do with it. The bank accounts and investments are for you and Julie. Buy a summer home or whatever and enjoy life. Keep any of the rest of the stuff you want, and the rest give to the Army-Navy Relief Fund or Goodwill." "What do you mean if something happens to you? What are you planning?" Sam wanted to know. "I'm going to solve this problem. That's all you need to know. If this mission goes south, you can truthfully say you knew nothing about it." "Don't push me on this, Sam. You can't talk your way out of this with those a-holes, and I won't let any of you get hurt again. Remember, I love you guys." I hugged Sam and left him in the courtyard. My next move was to find and scout the area that the remaining two a-holes ran around in. After finding out their habits, I could plan the mission. It took me 2 days to find them again, and another 2 days observing their movements before I was ready. Carl and Doug had changed bars. I guess even those two weren't dumb enough to go back to the bar where I had first met them. I never could find out where they were living. The new bar didn't fit in very well with my plans. There wasn't anywhere that I could use my rifle and therefore wouldn't be out of range of return gunfire. That only left the gunfight at the Oak Corral method. I would have to get up close and personal to do what I felt had to be done. The only consolation was that the AKs probably wouldn't be involved. I knew I could take the two punks, but the question was, could I do it and not get hurt? There wasn't going to be a chance of doing this from far away, so there would probably be witnesses. I would prefer not to go to jail, but if my family were safe, I could handle it. The plan was simple. I would wait until Carl and Doug went into the bar, and I would follow them in. Once inside, I would get in their faces, insult them, and question their manhood. The goal was to provoke them into attacking me, either physically or with weapons. I could then claim self-defense when I took them out. A physical attack, even if they used knives, shouldn't be a problem. However, it could go south if they pulled guns. They would just have to get lucky once to put a hurting on me. As much as I hate to believe it, I have slowed down a little. I wasn't as much of a Rambo as I had been, and I was becoming a senior citizen. I decided to do the mission on Friday night. Julie was still in the hospital, so I called Sam there. He answered the phone in Julie's room just like I hoped. "Hi, Sam. It's me. How's Julie? Alex, where are you? We haven't heard from you in almost a week. What are you planning?" Sam was full of questions. "It's not important where I am or what I'm going to do. I just wanted to check on Julie," I told him. "Julie is doing fine. We can take her home tomorrow. By the way, the police captain friend of yours was looking for you. He told me to tell you to leave things alone, that the police will handle those guys," Sam told me. "He said he didn't want you to get in over your head or get in trouble. Charlie always was a worrier. Don't tell him you talked to me. I don't want you involved in all this stuff. Remember the envelope and instructions I gave you, Sam. I love you guys. Take care, Alex." "Alex, wait. Don't do—" I hung up on him. I had told him the important stuff. Now it was time to do the mission and put an end to this. I got to the bar just after dark and parked my truck a couple of doors away from the entrance. Going around to the back of the building, I blocked the back door with the bar's dumpster. No one would be using the back door to get away. I knocked out the streetlights around the bar and the light over the door, then I went across the street and waited in the shadows for the punks to show up. An hour had passed, and I began to think I would have to wait for another night. Then the two a-holes pulled up in the same car they had used when they shot up Sam's house. What dummies! They got out of the car laughing at something and went into the bar. I wanted those two to have a few drinks before I braced them. While I waited, I went over my preparations and the plan in my head. I was wearing a kidney belt like motocross riders wear under my shirt. It covered me from just under my arms to just above my hips and had strips of hard plastic sewn into it. The belt would help protect me from knife wounds. It wouldn't help much with a gunshot, though. I had my .45 in the small of my back, covered by my jacket. There was a .38 special revolver strapped to my right ankle as a backup. I also had a special ops throwing knife taped to my left forearm. It was sort of overkill, but I wanted to be prepared. An hour had passed, and it was showtime, so I slowly walked into the bar. The only people there were the bartender, a couple of drunks at the bar, and Carl and Doug. They were at the back of the room sitting at a table. I stepped to the bar and got 2 beers. I carried the beers over to their table and set them down. Then I stood there and stared at Carl and Doug. They didn't notice me until I set the beers down. "What are you doing here, old man?" Carl was the one that spoke. He wasn't as cocky as he had been the first time we met. "I thought I cured you of that, old man. The last time we met, Junior. I wanted to buy you guys a beer before I said, 'Before what?' Carl was being a great straight man. 'Before I kill you and your buddy here, a-hole,' I answered. Carl and Doug were surprised at my answer. In their world, a guy would talk trash and be insulting before getting down to the nitty-gritty. "You pigs made a bad career move when you attacked my family. You made an even bigger mistake when you didn't kill me with that drive-by shooting. By the way, where's Frank?" Both of the men were beginning to realize that I wasn't just talking. They knew that I was going to do what I said. They began to fidget in their seats and looked at each other. Knowing that I had to escalate the action, I picked up the 2 beers and threw them into their faces. It got the reaction I wanted. The men stood up, and Carl pulled a very large knife and started toward me. I glanced at Doug, but he was staying put. I turned to Carl and took a step to meet him. That's when I felt the fire across my back and into my side. I dropped to my knees. I had made a rookie mistake. Doug also had a knife, and I hadn't kept him in view. He had slashed me with his knife. The plastic strips in the kidney belt stopped the blade from going into my body, but the blade slid across my back and ribs. That was the fire I felt. I kicked Doug away from me and faced Carl now. Carl tried to stab me from the front, but I was able to block the blow. I grabbed his arm, twisted it, and forced it over my shoulder as I turned. When I felt the arm lock, I used my shoulder for leverage, broke his arm, and he went to the floor. Quickly, I turned to face Doug again, but I was starting to fade a little because of my loss of blood. I had to finish this fast before I passed out. Doug stepped forward with his knife held high to stab me again. I pulled the .45 and shot him twice, once in the chest and the second one in the forehead. So much for Doug. I think my claim of self-defense would have had more validity if I had left it there, but Carl was still a threat. As I turned, I saw him getting to his feet, so I shot him twice in the head. I know what some of you will say: violence doesn't solve anything, and I'm a ruthless, cold-blooded killer. You may be right where those two are concerned. But violence begets violence, and violence solved the threat to my family when the law couldn't. Neither one of those apes will ever harm anyone again. Wait until you or your family is in danger of being beaten or killed, and the police can't or won't do anything to help you. Then tell me that you wouldn't do what was necessary to protect your loved ones. I did what had to be done, and I'll let God sort them out and decide who was right. As I left the bar, I must have left a trail of blood. At my truck, I pulled off the kidney belt and used my first aid kit to bandage my ribs. I couldn't really get to my back, so I taped a gauze pad over the wound. I got into my truck and drove away. About a mile away, I pulled over and passed out. That's where the police found me. They had a description of the shooter from the bar. That and the .45 led to my arrest. They took me to the ER and from there to jail. Sorry, a word here about the police. I admire these men and women almost as much as I admire our military people. The cops do a job that most of us couldn't or wouldn't do. They have to take crap from the a-hole public that no sane person should have to tolerate. Then we expect them to put their lives on the line to protect those same a-holes. They are underappreciated and woefully underpaid. If you parents want a role model for your children, you could do a lot worse than a policeman. The DA, Mark Rogers, wanted to charge me with everything, including the shooting of JFK, the Lindbergh baby kidnapping, and the sinking of the Titanic. He was a liberal and didn't believe anyone had the right to protect themselves. The problem with liberals is that they assume that they are the white knights who would solve world problems with their liberal outlook. In reality, they become part of the problem by standing with the scum of the earth. Scum is to be cleaned, not rolled on your body. Bring it on. I stand by my actions. I thought he and his kind were the real a-holes of the world. After I got out of the hospital, I was brought before a judge and given an attorney, and a trial date was set. Bail was refused because of the double killing. I pleaded justifiable homicide, self-defense, and was put back in jail to wait for my trial. My stay in jail was interesting, if nothing else. Most of my fellow inmates were waiting for trial, waiting for sentencing, waiting for an appeal, or just waiting to go to another jail. I was attacked twice. Being a new fish, I had to be put in my place. While the two guys that attacked me were in the infirmary, the word got around about why I was in jail. After that, I didn't have any more trouble. The criminal element was impressed with how far I had gone to protect my family. Lucky for me, I was in a relatively new section of the jail. I only had to share a cell with one other man. His name, can you believe it, was Bubba. I kid you not. Bubba was a very large man, 6'6" and 290 pounds, from Alabama. He had followed his wife when she came to the city to see her sister. Her sister wasn't at home, but her sister's husband was. Bubba walked in on them as they tried to screw each other to death. He helped by killing the man and putting his wife in the hospital for a month or so. Other than that, one time, Bubba was a gentle giant. He and I discussed a lot of things to pass the time. We talked about music, Southern rock mostly, baseball, politics, and what we were going to do when we got out. Bubba wasn't getting out, but he had hopes. I think the fact that he and I were friends also had something to do with the prison population leaving me alone. Sam and the rest of the family had been in to visit me a few times. On one of the visits, Bubba's sister was visiting at the same time, and I got to introduce my friend to my family. Bubba was touched that I would introduce him to the family and thanked me for including him. Emma and Luke would bring or send notes, letters, and cards to me, and they began to send Bubba things too. After one of the visits by Julie and Emma, a few of the inmates made some sexual remarks about the girls that upset Bubba. He didn't appreciate their talking about his new family that way, and he let them know it. He went to solitary for a few days, and the two inmates went to the infirmary. I suggested to Sam that the visits with my girls be restricted to phone calls. "Okay, but why? I mean, it seems safe enough with all the guards and everything," Sam said. "It's not the girls' safety I'm worried about." I explained about Bubba's displeasure at some of the comments by a couple of the other inmates and the outcome. He's got it tough enough without having to spend all his time in solitary. Have the girls send him a couple of cards and maybe a picture to let him know they're thinking about him. I didn't know it, but the Veterans Network was working in high gear. 3 days after I was put in jail, I had a visitor. His name was John Kendall, and he was one of the top defense attorneys in the country. He did a lot of pro bono work for veterans that had legal problems. John decided that I needed more than the court-appointed attorney. Finally, after all the legal wrangling, my trial began. Because of the double killing, the DA was prosecuting this case himself instead of handing it over to one of his flunkies. It was an election year, and a conviction would help his political career. It was a calculated risk on his part because a not guilty verdict would do more than a little harm to his career. At the time that Rogers, the DA, took over the case, he thought he would be facing a public defender and had a press conference promising to convict the deadly killer. He meant me. I think he wished he could reconsider his involvement when he found out that John Kendall was now my attorney. Instead of facing an overworked, underpaid, and comparatively inexperienced court-appointed counsel, he would be facing one of the best legal minds in the country. The jury selection process was a circus all by itself and took a full week. Mr. Rogers wanted to stack the jury with anyone that thought that the government knew best, and he didn't want anyone that would or could think for themselves. In fairness, I have to say that John Kendall wanted people who worked for a living, were military veterans, or families of vets. Rogers wanted mostly young liberals that were used to the government telling them what to do, and Kendall wanted a fair mix of older citizens who knew that the government couldn't or shouldn't be in their everyday lives. Like I said, a real circus. Once the trial actually started, it was pretty much cut and dried. John stipulated to the physical evidence that my gun had killed Carl and Doug. There was no doubt that I had shot them. The only question was why I did it. The prosecutor claimed that the murders were premeditated, that I hunted them down and killed them to get revenge for the attacks on my family. My stand was that the two attacked me, and I killed them in self-defense. Rogers was right. I did hunt them down and basically executed them like the animals that they were. Of course, I wasn't going to admit that to the court. The DA glossed over the attack on Emma, little Luke being beaten, and the two shootings. His witnesses were a parade of policemen, forensic experts, and even a psychologist. The shrink said that I was suffering from post-traumatic stress syndrome, which caused me to hunt down and kill the two men. His diagnosis was made without ever having interviewed or even talked to me. John quickly brought out the fact that the good doctor had never interviewed or examined me, and because the DA brought it up first, John was able to go into more depth and detail concerning the two shootings, the carjacking, and the assault on Emma and the beating given to Luke. The prosecutor's objections were shot down, so at least the jury knew what kind of people those two were. There had been 2 drunks in the bar that night, but Rogers and John decided not to call either one of them to testify. They had been sleeping off a drinking binge and would have made horrible witnesses for either side. The bartender testified that he saw me come into the bar and go to the back room where the 2 boys were drinking. The DA didn't ask him any more questions, but John got the bartender to admit that he heard Carl yelling at me, but that he didn't see what the yelling was about or what happened in the room. Another witness that was called by Rogers was the bartender on duty when I had my first run-in with Carl, Doug, and Frank. It was a mistake because the man testified that the 3 attacked me. As it ended up, the only evidence that the DA had was that I had shot the boys. He couldn't prove intent or premeditation. The trial ran for almost 2 weeks before the judge called for closing arguments. John Kendall's closing stated that twice I had gone to the men and tried to convince them to leave my family alone. He explained that on both occasions I was attacked, the last time with deadly weapons. I had no choice but to defend myself. He told the jury that the injuries I incurred from the knives proved my life was in danger. In John's final statement, he said that it wasn't a crime to protect yourself with deadly force if your life was in danger. Mr. Rogers' closing was pitiful. He rambled on and tried to convict me with his words instead of evidence. In the end, if you filtered out all the big words and speech-making, all you had was that I had killed those 2 men. He couldn't prove his claims of murder and couldn't disprove my claim of self-defense. Rogers basically said that I had shot the men and therefore I must be guilty. The judge instructed the jury as to their duties and sent them to deliberate on the charge of murder in the first degree. John told me that he believed that I would be acquitted on the charge of murder, but might be found guilty of some of the lesser charges brought against me, such as aggravated assault and assault with a deadly weapon. He told me not to worry too much about a guilty verdict on any of them because he planned to make appeals if necessary. Nothing personal, John, but if it's just the same to you, I'd rather not have to go through all this again, I told him with a smile. I knew that I could deal with what I did and with any punishment meted out, but I really would like to stay out of jail. He laughed and patted me on the shoulder, and then looked past me as the door to the jury room opened. The members of the jury filed back to their seats with solemn looks on their faces. The jury foreman was the last in line, and as he took his seat he glanced at me and nodded. The foreman, one Ted Williams, slipped by Rogers in the jury selection. Williams, at 45, was a former Marine, retiring after 20 years in the Corps. He was now a government employee. I guess that's why the DA thought Williams would be an asset to the prosecution. You've all seen it on TV. The judge came in and asked the jury if they had reached a verdict, and then requested that the jury foreman read the verdict. We, the jury, find the defendant not guilty of all charges and stipulations. The spectators in the courtroom gave a loud cheer of agreement. 2 weeks after the trial, I said goodbye to Sam, Julie, Emma, and Luke. I had done what was necessary to protect my family, but I was ready to go home. Sam and Julie tried to talk me into moving to Austin, but I like my life and friends in Houston. My wife is buried there, and my closest friends live there. It's my home. After all the years in the Army, traveling all over the world, I finally had a home. The drive back home took longer than the drive to help my family, and I had time to rethink some things. I'm truly sorry that those boys forced me to kill them, but I would do the same thing all over again. The events in Austin and seeing Sam and the family also made me realize how hollow living alone is. I think I'll talk to Claire about becoming more than friends with benefits. I'm not ready for the grave yet, and life goes on. Thank you for watching. What would you have done in Alex's shoes? Let us know in the comments below. Don't forget to like, share, and subscribe for more gripping stories. See you in the next video.